This is Danny Elfman, and you're listening to the LSQ Podcast.
Hey, it's Jenny Elfman. It was such a pleasure to connect with legendary film composer Danny Elfman for the conversation you're about to hear in episode 67 of the LSQ podcast. Thanks so much for pressing play. Danny and I talk about, as a child, how he first became interested in film scores, his years in Oingo Boingo, how he hooked up with director Tim Burton, with whom he's worked on more than 16 different films in the past 30 years, his new album, Big Mess, which is his first solo LP in 37 years, just released recently, and also about The Nightmare Before Christmas. He's reprising his role as Jack Skellington for a live performance of Nightmare at the Hollywood Bowl later this month. Let's get into it.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Danny. It's so nice to meet you. I'm honored to have you as a guest on the LSQ podcast.
And am I on camera?
You're not, no.
Oh.
I mean, you can turn your camera on if you'd like. Oh, there we are. Hi.
I didn't realize. Sorry, that's rude.
Well, no, I mean, you know, we're all adapting to what do we do in this situation, you know, where we're connecting this way. So I respect all choices of camera, no camera kind of thing. I just need to hear you, but it's good to see you as well.
Other than I look like a wreck,
I'm sitting in a closet right now. I'm literally sitting in my closet where I record all my shit.
Well, you know, it's funny because I got a new house that I'm just moving into in L.A., and I was trying to figure out where to put a studio, and I was looking at this hillside going, oh, I could put it there, but it'll be so expensive, caissons and supports of retaining walls, and my wife's assistant, Gloria, she comes up to me and she goes, what about your closet? And I laugh, and I go up there and I look, and I said, you know, I actually could, and now that's going to be my new studio.
Oh, wow.
I'm just modifying a wall, you know, where there's like a closet within the closet kind of doors, and I'm kind of breaking it all out, and it's absolutely minimal, but for a home studio, it'll absolutely provide the minimum requirements for me to do my thing in the middle of the night when I, need to come up with an idea, and I could run in there and take care of it.
Amazing. Yeah. No, now I feel a little bit more like impressed with my own closet studio now that I know that Danny Elfman is going to have a closet studio as well, you know?
It's almost like...
It's where the magic happens.
Right. You know, I think that we're kind of reaching the point technologically for a composer where you need less and less. And at a certain point, it's like, I just need a table, a computer and 2 monitors, and a keyboard. And there actually was plenty of room in this kind of weird closet, kind of makeup room, perhaps, off my bathroom. I mean, I literally have to walk through my bathroom to get to my studio when it's done. It's going to be pretty funny.
That's awesome. I mean, I can't help but wonder, thinking about previously when you're looking at the side of a hill and, you know, thinking you might build one truly from scratch, like approximately how many studio spaces would you estimate you've constructed for yourself over the years?
My God, at least half a dozen. My first studio, I lived in Topanga Canyon in this kind of weird place, and I had to dig underneath the house and prop the house up and then pour a wall and then make my studio for myself because I lived on this weird hillside. And at that point, we needed like reel-to-reel 24-track tape recorders, and it was so cumbersome. And I was down like 100 steps and trying to get a 24-track down. Oh my God, and a mixing board. It was incredibly difficult.
So what year-ish would that have been?
Late 80s.
Right. So before that, you were really just ad-libbing with whatever space you had in a existing home or rehearsal space or...
I mean, there wasn't before that. Really, that was my first home studio.
Yeah, because by late 80s, you were starting to also just have money coming in such that you could build a studio. You were already starting to do film projects, and Oingo Boingo was huge, and so that was the first, like, I'm going to build my own studio from scratch, basically?
Well, it was really when I got the film composing because I needed a space to work in and do these demos and record my pieces and play them back for directors, and it just changed my needs. For me in a band, I didn't need really a home studio. When you're in a band, you write songs, you come up with the chords, you play the parts just to remember them and do it to your portable tape recorder, and lyrics are scribbled out on a sheet of paper, and you kind of bring that in and work it out with the band. There's not need for much of a studio, I found, when I was in Oingo Boingo. But then when I started getting the composing work, it's like, okay, I have to make demos of every piece of music and have directors over and play them back for them. So that became like a new dilemma, and so hence my first home studio.
There must be a kind of an evolving understanding over the years and various studios since then of what it is that achieves the right combination of the utility that you need in any given situation to have the gear that you need, but also considering the creative world you have to go into to write these kinds of things. I would imagine you've, over the years, noticed you need certain aesthetic components of the space, or is there any kind of thread of where you're like, my studio space needs to have this kind of creatively supportive element of it for me specifically?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I love my studio here in Hollywood where I work now. It's not, as you can see, it's nice. It's not huge,
Right.
but it does everything I need to do, and I could put half a dozen people in here and play back music. But when I wrote Big Mess, I have a house up north out of town, and it has the most minimal little space. And it was originally owned by a German opera singer, and it was her teaching room, the little room that she gave opera lessons in, and I made that my music room. But it's so bare bones. I have a computer, and on the computer I can bring a file from Los Angeles and work a piece of score if I want to do that, but has no external synthesizers, really just a computer, and along with it, in case I need it, I have one electric guitar and one handheld mic. And because sometimes on a score, I actually do use my voice, or I use electric guitars. And so it's kind of set up for that. And when I went up there to quarantine, and I'd never stayed there for more than a week, and after a couple of months, it's like I ended up staying there a year, but I realized that that's all I needed, and I recorded all of the basic tracks for Big Mess in this little room, no working headphones for the first couple of months because I couldn't get them working, and at a certain point I didn't care, and when I finally did get them working, I didn't use them anyhow because I was just enjoying handheld mic in front of the speakers, and it made me really understand how little that I really needed to get in there and record these songs.
Yeah, you can't help but wonder though if there's some vibes of like children singing German opera, though, just like hanging out in the room, like some spirits that also like had to have been imbuing something into the mix.
No, that's very true. I mean, I do believe that the singer, she lived there for 50 years before me, and that her ghost does lurk about, and I think she's pleased with who ended up in her house.
I would hope so. Otherwise, she should just get the fuck out.
I know. I did a couple times when I bought the place. I found like weird things, like photograph out that I didn't know where it came from of her and the house. Like one of the house from the 1940s with a dog and her in the front of the house. And it's like, where did this come from? Like kind of some strange stuff like that happen. But the point is, I figured if a ghost is doing this, I consider this kind of to be like a good thing. Here's a picture of me and my dog when we first bought the house. That's not a hostile thing, There's a lot worse thing that ghosts can do. I thought it was very sweet. So, and one of the rooms of the house I've dedicated to her. It was a room that still had furniture in it when I bought the place and had a vibe, and I kept all the original furniture in it, and I have pictures of her all over the room.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, we call it the ghost room. I don't know whether she's ever in there, but if she ever does come through the house, I want her to see that her name and her memory is revered
Oh, that's wonderful.
and celebrated.
Yeah, yeah. Another interesting thing though, we're here today in part talking about Big Mess, which is your first album in 37 years. And I know from reading up about it that you didn't go into that house thinking I'm going to make my first new album in 3+ decades. It was something that arose in the moment, but
Oh
that it was
definitely.
deeply impactful that letting that come out of you was deeply impactful. Yes.
Yeah, it was almost like therapy because heading into 2020, first off, 2020 was such a strange year for me. It was going to be because I took no film work for the whole year, which is rare. Well, rare meaning I've never done that. And I had so many concerts booked, I decided I'm really just going to commit to these concerts. Normally, I have a couple of concerts here and there that I work my projects around, but here I had like 25, 30 concerts. And so Coachella, tremendous amount of work building a show up from scratch for Coachella. And then we were going to do more shows possibly around Coachella. Also, I had Burton Elfman shows, this big orchestral thing that we take around the world. I had Nightmare Before Christmas shows. And I also had the London premiere of my violin concerto, which was playing also in a number of different cities, plus 2 premieres, world premieres. A piece for the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain and a cello concerto.
It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
so it was a lot of stuff, and it all collapsed, right?
Yeah.
So I holed up at this house with my wife and child and dog, but I was really depressed. 3 months of solid work going into preparing this. I don't know if anybody at Coachella has ever accepted a concert with nothing ready. No band, no nothing. I mean, literally from the ground up, and creating lots of visuals. And, it was really exciting. And I just started rehearsing with this band that I was really loving. And we were just starting to sound good. So, I finally worked up the nerve to do this, and it all collapses. And then on top of that, add to that America 2020. I almost felt that George Orwell could have written a sequel to 1984 and called it 2020. And it was like an America that I never could have imagined in my lifetime, that we're actually handing over democracy to some, it'll be called a democracy, but like a Putin-style democracy where there's no question about authoritarian regime completely in charge, and there's no opposition really. And it's like this non-reality 2 + 2 = 5. And I just kept thinking Orwell is alive right now, because that's what it means to buy into these lies, is you really have to believe 2 + 2 = 5 because Big Brother says so. Our ruler says so. And we don't need facts. We don't need science. We don't need anything but the fact that our ruler says so. And I said, that can't be happening here. And yet it was. And then, of course, throw on top of that a year of isolation and pandemic. So it was kind of a perfect storm for me to go crazy. And in that, I just thought, well, I'll sit down and put lyrics to a few songs and ideas. I had this idea I was pitching for a festival called Dark Mofo in Tasmania in 2019, and I called it to them chamber punk. And so I had this piece of music with no lyrics, and it became the song Sorry, the first song on Big Mess, but it was done as a long, like really 10, 12-minute instrumental kind of rock band orchestral fusion piece of music. And I said, well, I'll start by putting, I'll start there. And what I realized when I started going was that I had so much venom in me that it wasn't healthy. And then when I really started writing, it really kind of the Pandora's box flew open. So whereas my goal was to write half a dozen songs, before I knew it, I had 18. And I had to call my manager and go, look, we need to put an arbitrary deadline here because I won't stop. I've got that OCD thing. and I'll be continually trying to get it better, a better song, better, get it right, get it right, get it right. And I'll never stop because there's no deadline. And so we did. And, finally in later summer, we said, that's it, no more. Hence the big mess.
Yeah, I mean, so did it feel in a sort of very cause and effect way that each time you worked on one of these pieces that became these songs that you felt better, that you felt lighter, or like this is whether or not this is a Danny Elfman album 30 plus years after, later, it doesn't matter. I need to purge this stuff.
Yeah, I needed to get it off my chest. And it was odd that, when I used to be in Oingo Boingo, I was constantly battling these impulses to go in opposite directions. And it really made it difficult and finally impossible for me to be in a band. I wanted to be in a different band every 2 years. And I've always felt really envious of artists out there that seem to have a really clear identity of what they were. When I was in Oingo Boingo, we used to play at this club downtown called Madame Wong's Chinatown. And right down the street in Chinatown was a place called the Hong Kong Cafe. And there was a band called X that would play there. And I would run to see X in between each of my sets because we do 2 sets, and I would see X in the middle. And I remember thinking, man, they're real. And I have no identity. And I was so envious of that I always felt like I was some kind of chameleon, but I never knew who or what I was. And so when I was in a band, I wanted to, well, first, I was in weird musical cabaret theater for 8 years. And then suddenly I hear ska music out of England and say, I want to be in a band. And I start a band. But every 2 years, I wanted to be in a different band. But you can't do that when you're in a band. And then suddenly I become a film composer out of the blue. And I realized these competing impulses worked to my favor rather than torturing me. Because you can go from one extreme to the other. You can go from really intense kind of grinding music to something very small and minimal and touching, to something very lush and romantic, to something completely absurd and ridiculous. And that appealed to me. It had both sides of me settled down because they each got their turn. And then when I started writing Big Mess, I was going, oh man, these guys, they don't like each other, and they're competing for space right now. And the songs started coming out in pairs. It was really weird. It's like each song would be dark, and then really crazy fast and energized, and then heavy, and then kind of crazy fast. And it's like, okay, that's already, by the time I had 6 songs, I was like, this is going to be 2 different albums. These don't have anything to do with each other. They're like kind of the 2 not nasty, but competing kind of mindsets that each one doesn't like the other and elbows the other one out of the way and goes, no, kind of fast, crazy, kind of get it out there, bam, 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 bam. And the other one is like, no, heavy, like you feel most of the time, heavy, filled with like, thoughts of your own demise and the end of everything, and the end of your life, and the end of the country, and the end of the universe as you know it. They were both fighting for microphone time, and by the end, I realized this is definitely a big mess, and that big mess is definitely me.
Zooming out on all of the music you've made, and you talk about wanting to be a different band every couple of years, and that as wide as the spectrum is in your film catalog, it's still the through line is it sounds like you. I mean, there is a sound that you make that is what people seek out when they seek out you as the composer. That is what you and I can't help but wonder if, in a way, it's always had this dichotomy that you're talking about with Big Mess, which leads to the question, when you were a kid and you first embraced songwriting as a thing that you might do and do again, how was it different than writing Big Mess? How did it feel back then?
I think the biggest difference is I was more protective of myself. When I wrote songs in Oingo Boingo, I mostly wrote third person. meaning take the point of view of a character, either likable or despicable, didn't matter, and tell a story from that perspective. And that's kind of a fun way to write, but it's also, in hindsight, I see very protective. And only on occasions did I write something that was really from me. And when Big Mess started, it was the other way around. I wrote a couple of songs, third person, meaning like Love in the Time of COVID is a song written by a horny 20-year-old living in a small apartment by himself, climbing the walls, going crazy. Obviously, that's not me. But most of them were. And so it was really, rather than being more like 90% sarcastic and third person, or 80% in Oingo Boingo, somewhere in there, it kind of flipped around. And I was writing in a way that I honestly didn't know if I was going to put the songs out, because I go, this is too dark and it's too personal. And, maybe these are just for me and a dozen friends to listen to and family. And it wasn't until after it was all done that I said, no, what the fuck? Just put them out there and, it'll be what it'll be. And people will find it or they won't find it. And they'll go, oh, my God, this guy's droll and boring, or that's okay, It's like people will think what they're going to think, or they more likely they won't discover it and won't think anything one way or the other. And that's fine, too.
I noticed that you also last year composed a 10-minute piece of music for President Biden for during the convention. Yes, his acceptance.
That was in the middle. That was in the middle
of it.
Yeah, middle of Big Mess. It's like I got a call, and it was kind of like David Guggenheim called, the filmmaker, and he said, "Are you busy?" And I go, "Extremely." I go, do you have any music that you might have that you could lend us for the Biden, not the inauguration, I'm sorry, it was for the convention, the acceptance of the nomination. And I said, oh, I get it. Yeah. I said, when do you need it? He goes, I need it next week. I said, I'll start in the morning. And it was kind of like call to duty. It's like you're in the National Guard and you get that call saying, you're on tomorrow, show up at 6:00. And it's like, yes, sir. And it felt like that. It's like, all right, I this is different. This is, you drop everything and you just do it. And so I did. I dropped everything and I wrote the piece, and he was wonderful to work with. And I was happy and proud to just make any little contribution that I could to the campaign, as minimal as it was. Yeah, totally.
Plus, you had already started to kind of open the vein of letting out some of what you were feeling about the presidency that, as we now know, was luckily ending, and to have.
Well, but I didn't think it was ending.
Right.
In fact, I was sure that it wasn't. So it was really desperate times for me. I'm an eternal pessimist. I'm one of those people that looks at the half-filled glass, and I see a glass that's 3/4 empty, not a glass that's half full. And so, to me, there was just no doubt that Trump was going to bulldoze himself into a second presidency. And it's ironic that it took a world pandemic to bring him down.
Let's go back to your earliest memories of music affecting you. What do you remember being the first music that really struck you in a meaningful way, like as a little kid?
Really, it was film music. And I was about 11 or 12 when I saw a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it was a score by Bernard Herman. And it's the first time I recognized there's a name by this music that I'm really enjoying, and the music really moved me. And then growing up in the 60s, there was all these science fiction fantasy films I loved the stop motion animation of Ray Harryhausen. And so if a film had the name Harryhausen and Herman, which is the animator Ray Harryhausen and the composer Bernard Herman, I knew it was going to be my favorite film of the year, and it always was. So those would be films like The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, I loved these movies with the skeletons with swords fighting each other to Bernard Herrmann's music. It was just brilliant.
how long did it take you to put together in your mind that it was the music that goes with the visuals, that that was part of what you really get off on?
Well, I mean, I think it was that movie that I realized that I didn't, I'd always taken it for granted, like most kids or most people would, that there's just music there. It's just playing.
Right.
And you don't think about it. And suddenly it was a realization that, no, this music was created to go with this film by an individual artist.
Right.
And I started noticing film scores as I was a teenager. And really, I mean, me becoming a film composer was like a fan of a game getting pulled into the game. Because by the time I was a young adult, it never occurred to me that I would be a film composer. And I never tried towards that goal. It didn't seem possible. I didn't have the tools to do that. I never went to school. Music school. I just didn't seem possible. But I was
You're a pessimist. We know this.
I'm a pessimist, but I was a big fan. And so it was almost like, when I live in Los Angeles and I grew up here. So watching Laker games, the basketball team, you'd always see a shot of Jack Nicholson courtside. It's like, there's the game. It's like, okay, there's, Kobe or whomever, doing this amazing stuff. And there's Jack Nicholson, like off on the side, kind of like with his sunglasses on. So it's kind of like there's a Laker game going. Somebody gets injured and they toss the ball to Jack and go, get on the court. You're on. And that's kind of like what it was like when I was thrown the ball in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It's like, wait a minute, I'm a fan. I'm not a composer. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And it's like, and Tim was like, no, you can do this. And so I did. Because I may be a pessimist, but I'm never one to turn down a challenge. And it seemed impossible. And that made it really seem juicy and tantalizing.
Right. Was that literally the first job? Because Weird Science was written for Weird Science, correct? But that was sort of just a one-off song situation.
That was a one-off song, which is, I'd had a number of songs. And when I met Tim Burton for Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I actually thought that he was looking for a song. It didn't occur to me that he was looking for a score. I just thought, oh, okay, you want a song. Let's talk about what kind of song. But the very first time I did music for film was from my brother, a film called Forbidden Zone. But it wasn't like an orchestral score. It was, I'm trying to think of how to explain it. This was the end of the theater group, the Mystic Knights. And so I wrote a score for the Mystic Knights, but I didn't score it in a way that, like you would for an orchestral score. It wasn't like I was writing out every beat to the screen. I was really coming up with musical ideas that seemed to fit and creating some songs, and then themes from those songs would play. It was the first time putting music to film, but it wasn't a score in what I was going to learn to be what scoring was, meaning writing down every note exactly in sync with the scenes in the movie. But it was the first experience, and it really did help get me Pee-wee's Big Adventure, because Tim Burton was a fan of Oingo Boingo, the band. But Paul Rubens, a.k.a. Pee-wee Herman, he was a big fan of Forbidden Zone. So somehow when they were talking about music, my name came up from two different directions, because Paul had made a note that, whoever did this Forbidden Zone, if I do a movie, I want this guy to do my music. So he already had like my name in the hat there, and Tim used to come see the band. I was writing music. Tim was digging it, and that's all I cared about. And I honestly expected Warner Brothers would hear the score and throw it out and hire a real composer to do a proper score. And so for me, it was just an experience. It's like, have fun, write the score, don't get upset when they throw it out, and move on, get back to what you do. But it'll be like, a cool experience. But it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, how far in, or how many films in were you when you started to feel like, not just confidence that in executing it at any project that might come up, but also just the understanding that this is your thing, how...
I have to say that first time I was in front of the orchestra, the first cue with Pee-wee's Big Adventure, it was kind of like heroin. It was like, it got into my veins, and it was like, oh, I could really like this. I'd never been in front of an orchestra before, and I just couldn't believe how full and big the sound was. And it definitely gave me the bug, but it took 10 more films for me to really know that this is something I really want to do. So it really wasn't until Batman.
Since then, obviously, you take a lot of different kinds of film projects, but, given your choice, if you were always picking the kinds of films that you would be working on, what is your favorite type of film to make music for?
Well, there you get the competing sides again. I wouldn't. I like it when a score is very anything. So if it's very intense, I'm happy. If it's very absurd, I'm happy. If it's very romantic, I'm happy. And if it's really small and intimate, I'm happy. So I don't have a kind of score that I love. It just has to be varied. The time where I'm unhappy is where it's somewhere in the middle, and I get miserable because there's just nothing for me to grab onto. And I feel like I'm just putting, there's moments as a composer where you're just putting music to a scene that may not really need music, but, the filmmakers feel that they need to have music going. But there's nothing to grab hold of and go, this is what should be playing. And, for example, I learned early on that doing a romantic comedy, I was absolutely miserable. I just wanted to kill myself. It's like, writing for contemporary characters in romantic comedy, I never knew what to do. Nothing I wrote came out easily or naturally. It was the hardest, the hardest genre for me in the world, unless the characters got kind of kinky or twisted. Like A Silver Lining Playbook is a romantic comedy, but I love doing it. But the characters were weird enough, and the story was that it's like, oh, this is no problem because I get this. They're like fucked up humans. It's like it completely works for me. It's not just a cute couple meeting each other over and over and you're just waiting for them to fall in love.
Which is boring as hell.
Which is boring as hell to me.
Yeah.
And they were like damaged people. And, once damaged people come into the picture, it's like, okay, I'm fine now.
Well, yeah, I guess Good Will Hunting is kind of that way ultimately, too.
Good Will Hunting is, too. It was
is,
very emotional.
It's not a rom-com, but it is in a way.
It is in a way, but it's definitely got a heart of like, of a drama, of what's going to happen, of this kind of weird character we just can't tell if he's got a future in this planet or not, and I really liked it. It's like, as you said, it's romantic, but it's not a romantic comedy. It's really a story of like somebody surviving against odds in a kind of remarkable way, and that became very interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of that one in particular, I'm intrigued just as someone who was not just a massive fan of, but also friends with Elliott Smith. I'm curious with the Good Will Hunting, like, how much, once you became aware that there was going to be this through line of a few of his songs throughout the movie, like, did that pivot at all what you were writing?
Oh, yeah, it did. Usually when I start a film, the songs are added at the end. And most commonly, as I'm writing, there's just, don't write score here, here, and here. Song, song, song. But there might be a dozen different songs over the course of every time I get a cut, they're trying a different song. And I often don't know what it'll be until the movie's completely finished. And this was rare. I went onto the set while they were shooting. And when I met Gus in Boston out there, he gave me a CD. And he said, I'd like you to listen to Elliott Smith. I really think it's going to be, songs are just going to be by him. And I listened to the Elliott Smith and I was like, oh, yeah, I love this. And then I had the pleasure of sitting in Gus's basement with Elliott and Gus with acoustic guitars. And I was playing through ideas and Elliott was playing stuff. It was so much fun to be interacting. And it absolutely did inform the tone. I knew that I was going to write with acoustic guitar because Elliott was using acoustic guitar. And I wanted to make the score go in and out of his songs as kind of fluidly as possible, so that there are a few moments where they almost touch, And so I wanted to create the tone of the score. So when the score went into the song or back into score, it would feel really effortless and fluid. And so Elliott definitely informed me tonally the direction that I really wanted to stay in for that score. And working with him was such a pleasure.
Yeah, he was a wonderful guy, and much more light and funny in person than people assume. So I'm guessing you probably had some good laughs around each other as well.
It was during the Academy Award rehearsals, and Elliott calls me once. He goes, "Danny, I'm at this rehearsal, and we're doing my song, and they did their own arrangement for the strings, and I'm not happy. Can you do something?" And I go, "Well, Elliott, when do you need this by?" He goes, "Tomorrow."
And it was just like with Biden. You were called to duty.
I did it that night. We got the music out the next morning really fast, and he was much happier.
You mentioned that, some of the spirit of making Big Mess was informed by having not taken any film scores for the year and thinking you were leading up to Coachella, and then you weren't. But
yeah.
The question is twofold. One is, are you now stuff's getting back into action? Do you have any upcoming film projects? Obviously you can't tell us what they are, but are you back into that work mode? A. B.
Yeah. No,
Coachella. Is Coachella, yeah. Do you think Coachella still, what's coming up?
It's the busiest time ever for me because I thought Big Mess would take 6 months of my life, and here it's like a year and a month later, and it's still I'm finished the album. Oh, okay, that's the easy part. Now it's like obviously I'm doing press, which I really have been enjoying, by the way. So there's a lot of work, but also I am on a film. It's called 65. That's all I can tell you.
Cool.
And it's a mostly synthesizer film. So I've been busily scraping together all my synthetic sounds because that's always a bit of a chore switching from orchestral to synthesizer, but it's challenging and I love it.
Yeah.
I'm also trying to finish the last movement of a cello concerto that will debut next spring for a French cellist named Gautier Capuçon. And so it's a little crazy around here. And also I've been doing remixes for the deluxe set, so that's not over yet. It's like,
right.
Oh, we got the deluxe box set. So every day this last week, I'm working on this fantastic book of artwork of Sarah Sitkin, who did all the imagery for the project, making like a 56-page book, trying to make a mold of my hand, because I had this idea of like a hand in the box set that comes out and you can set on, and it could be like, you could light it up, because I love hands. I'm obsessed with hands. And I got a weird one, so I thought that would be fun. And also a number of remixes.
Wow. Incredible. All good stuff, though.
Yeah, all good stuff. And then I go right into Doctor Strange 2 from Marvel. And
getting ready for the shows in the fall, right?
You've got Nightmare Before Christmas coming back. Thank God, because that's like the first concert it'll be over a year and a half, of no concerts. And finally, the first signs of like, no, we're doing a concert.
And I would imagine, too, I recently thought of this analogy of, like, video games, how in video games your character has power bars for the different things that you can get power from, and we all have our different power bars. You know, like, I like when I make a good suggestion and somebody takes it. That's one of my power bars,
okay.
But I would imagine that playing Skellington is one of your power bars, where it's just, like, its own thing, where you're like, I'm doing the Skellington thing, it's going to feel awesome.
It really is fun. It really feels good because, first off, it's not a part of my repertory. It's not like I'm bringing back something that I did a lot, because I never sang any of those songs live when I wrote them. They were done in the studio, and I never thought about it after that. So until 7, 8 years ago, when I did this thing for Albert Hall, it never occurred to me that I would ever sing them live. So, and the concerts are far enough apart that I haven't gotten that sense that I used to get being in a band where I'd go on tour, where it's like, that's it. I never want to perform this song again. It's like,
right.
Give me 3 to 6 months of touring and I never want to play something again. I don't know how bands tour for a year. I don't know how they tour year after year. It is an art and a skill. I think to me it's the same skill one has that goes into theater. You're going on every night. You're doing 7 shows a week, or 6, 7, 8 shows a week every night. How do you do that?
I think it's the wanting to be that person. I guess too. That's the thing with you becoming Jack Skellington. Now that the past several years you've been able to do that here and there. It's just like that you get to inhabit that character.
I get to inhabit it, but I keep it sparse enough that it doesn't hit me with this sense of like, I never want to do this again. I'm not there yet. And because, especially with Jack Skellington, it's such a surprise to be able to bring back this character that I thought was gone. In other words, of all the movies I've worked on, the one I was most invested in was Nightmare Before Christmas. Normally I'm on a film for about 12 weeks. Here I was on for 2 years. And I was there from the very inception with Tim. Because the first thing, we didn't have a script. We started writing the songs. And we didn't really know how to start. So it's like, well, let's start with the songs. And it made sense to us. There was no handbook on how to start an animated musical. And so I was very invested in the character, and I really related to the character because what Jack Skellington, the king of Halloween Land, wanting to escape, but everybody loved what he did, was very much like being a songwriter, singer-songwriter in a band. You're the king of your own little universe, but I wanted out for years, and I didn't know how to get out. And so when Tim came to me with the story of Jack Skellington, I was like, oh, I so know this guy. And as I was writing the songs, I was half writing the song. Obviously, I was writing the story of Jack Skellington, but I was writing also myself into it. It was like, I understand this guy because I'm going through the same thing. And then as the movie was coming out, there was such confusion over what it was, and nobody knew. Disney didn't know how to market it, which makes, in their defense, how could they? This was not Beauty and the Beast. This was not Little Mermaid. And there was no model. There was nothing for them to grab hold of and go, what is this? And then on top of that, there was a general perception that the film, kids hated it. And so it was too scary for kids. And so I did a press junket in Disney World for Nightmare Before Christmas for 2 days. And every single journalist said the same thing. They said, so this movie's too scary for kids. Who's it for?
Fuck.
And over and over and over, I was going, no. And I would hear things like, I hear Santa Claus is tortured. And I go, no. He's not tortured. He's inconvenienced, and he's not even terribly upset with it by the end. It's not. But there was, and Disney pulled all their marketing, and it just came out with it just kind of came and went fairly fast. And I was heartbroken. I just felt like it was really misunderstood. And so to find an audience and regain a second life is so rare for a movie that I'll always feel that Nightmare is like this kind of special, it was like a blessing in a way, because how many films get a second life? The Wizard of Oz was one. It kind of didn't do that well, but then obviously became popular later. There are films that develop these big cult followings after they're out, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like, to a certain extent, maybe Donnie Darko. There's those films that kind of develop a following years after they're out. But there's so few. And the fact that I was in Tokyo with Tim for the opening of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we would run around the toy stores together, and there was Jack and Sally dolls everywhere. And Tim was going, I've never even seen this stuff. And there was even a Nightmare Before Christmas inspired club in downtown Tokyo. And it's like, this thing has not gone away. And then after that, Disney started picking up on the fact that, this is kind of like a cultural thing. It keeps kind of hanging in there. And they started putting energy into it. To their credit, a decade after it was out, I think they understood what it was now. And the most gratifying thing for me, and this is one of the reasons I love doing these concerts, is that this was the movie that kids hated. This was the movie that was too scary for kids. And I look out there at these audiences, and it's families and it's kids. And, people are always sending me videos of their kids singing songs from Nightmare. And that generation after generation, more kids get into it. And every time I see that, I feel a sense of vindication that I always knew that it was twisted in just enough to make a kid enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, and if you liked stuff that was kind of weird and surreal and twisted cartoons as a kid, then why wouldn't kids of whatever generation also be into? You need to give kids more credit for their smarts, that they're
Absolutely.
not that easily freaked out. But
Yeah.
but I'm just so glad that it provided you an inadvertent opportunity to have now, these years later, like this show that you go do. You weren't even trying to be Jack Skellington, and now it's like brings such joy to people, that concert experience.
Yeah, thank you. It is really a pleasure. I'm still enjoying it at least one more time. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do it because I don't want to run it into the ground.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to become a thing where everybody knows where I'm going to be every Halloween, because it was like that for years with Oingo Boingo, and it kind of drove me crazy. It's like Oingo Boingo did a Halloween show every year. And then there's a certain point with Nightmare where it's like, oh my God, am I just back to that same thing of like every Halloween we know where Danny's going to be? I don't like being that predictable. But at the same time, there's people are getting such pleasure from it. And I'm still enjoying walking out there and reviving Jack Skellington songs and singing with that voice. And I owe it to Jack in terms of even having a voice at all, because I'd really stopped singing. And when we started, it's the 25th anniversary of Tim Burton and mine, our collaboration, and they wanted to do this concert at Albert Hall in London of Tim Burton's music that became known as the Elfman Burton concert series. And I had to write 15 suites of 15 scores, and it was a lot of work. And at a certain point, my agent had asked me, so when you're doing Nightmare, would you be willing to sing a couple songs? And I said, oh yeah, sure. But of course I said it and it was forgotten 5 minutes later. So 6 months later, I'm writing these suites, and it's really hard. I'm reinventing every suite for the concert, for the live stage. And I get to Nightmare, and I call him up and I go, did I say I was going to sing? And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, I'm not. He goes, well, it's too late. They're already advertising it. And I go, God damn it. I don't know if I can do this. And so I'm trying to relearn the songs. And I haven't sung at that point in 18 years since my last concert. And I'm sitting there backstage with a show that I have no idea if any part of the show is going to work. There was no test run. There was no preview. This was the first ever show of Elfman Burton Suites with an orchestra live, and me singing for the first time in 18 years. And it was like, what a disaster. And I had these images in my mind of being, ridden out of London on a rail with tarred and feathered. That's my image of how this is going to go. I've never also performed in England. And I froze up, and I'm backstage. And it's like, I'm going, I can't do this. I just can't do it. And fortunately for me, Helena Bonham Carter was sitting on the floor next to me, getting in character. She was going to do Sally that night. And so she's backed up against the wall, and she's kind of loosening up. And she goes, Danny, what's going on? And I go, Helena, I don't think I could do this. And she goes, Danny, what the fuck? Right? And it was like, yes, thank you. What the fuck? And I just went through the doors and I did it. And it's like just exactly the frame of mind that I've had my whole life, and it was abandoning me at that moment. And Helena had to remind me that, they're not going to fucking kill you. Just go out there and do it. And it was one of the best nights of my life. The audience was so warm and so supportive that it was this incredible reminder of, you feel like you're on a high wire without a net and you're going to die. And then at a certain point you realize, no, the audience is your net. They're like totally with you. And if you fuck up, they'll be fine. They'll say, it's okay, start it again. We're fine with it. That happened to me one night at the Hollywood Bowl. I screwed up a song and I just motioned to the conductor and we started it again. The audience loved it. And that really is the best thing about a live performance and live audience and theater in general, It's the thing that makes theater always exciting. It's the propensity for failure is always there. And at a certain point, you're so behind an actor that if they do screw up, you're like, no, I'm there with you. It's like, come on, you can get back on track. We're right there with you. And you see them get back on track and you're rooting for them. And it feels so good, if you're in the audience and that happens, you almost feel like you helped them get back on again just by giving them your love and support. And it was a great reminder and a great lesson of what's wonderful about live performance, especially live performance that, you're not playing to pre-recorded music. There was nothing safe about what you're doing. It's not tried and true. The risk factor is high. And the higher the risk factor in moments like this, the greater the rewards. That's what makes it all so fucking great.
The audience is the net. I love that idea.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's okay to mess up.
Like, could Danny Elfman be any more awesome? I don't think so. The story about dedicating the room in the house to the German opera singer, I mean, man, what a great guy. That does bring us to the end of episode 67. Thanks again to Danny Elfman for the convo, and thank you for listening. The new episode in a few weeks will be with Adam from The War on Drugs. Their album, I Don't Live Here Anymore, is about to come out. And then Courtney Barnett for episode 69. Nice. That'll be out in November and the final episode of this year/season. If you've got feedback or questions, you can hit me up at Jenny LSQ.
It's like I'm made for FM radio, right?
No, you are. You should do a podcast. You're a very good talker.
But I want to be like
about it?
a DJ on a late night jazz station.
Yeah.
Where you're just kind of like talking like this, using that voice, and that's the kind of thing I want to do, like that midnight to 3 a.m. shift on a jazz station somewhere.